Yes, I'm back with another book review. We're in the same clothes from the last one, not because I'm filming this on the same day, or because I've worn these all week, just because I happen to be wearing them today. But the last book I reviewed was in fact so felonious that I ended up actually damaging it in the process of the review. And that book was The Gorilla Hunters by R.M. Ballantyne. And after reading that book, I desperately tried my best to cleanse my slate or clean my slate or whatever, wipe it clean. And in order to do that, I turned to an author who I knew could do so without effort. And I've talked about him before in the past in a couple of book reviews. This is the third time I'm going to be discussing him. And the author is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, obviously. And I suppose for the past, I don't know, week or so, I've been taken up in the exploits of probably his personal favorite character, Professor George Edward Challenger. I have two copies of the Professor Challenger stories, this nice hardcover and this paperback. I read this one, but I'll just put this down here because it's heavy. So, who is Professor Challenger? Well, he just so happens to be the antithesis of Sherlock Holmes. Don't get me wrong, I love Holmes, but Challenger is just wonderful. Whilst Holmes is a sort of a very practical, sort of resourceful sort of a chap who brings in people from the outside to help in his exploits, Challenger is very aggressive and incorrigible and very purple in his speech and sometimes unlikable in the grand scheme of things, but really tries to take matters into his own hands and such, and is inclined to make some very outrageous claims in the scientific field, which indeed turn out to be true. And Conan Doyle liked this character enough to write 3 novels and 2 short stories, of which he is the sole personage. And the first one, obviously, is The Lost World, which is among my favorite books of all time. I mean, it's the book that got me into reading and into writing as well. And I recommend it to anybody, really, who's into reading to read this, to see where it all started, what inspired Jurassic Park, The Land That Time Forgot, King Kong, all those go here. This is my 4th or 5th time reading it, I believe, and it is just as good as when I first read it, or even when I read it the 3rd time, or 2nd time, or whenever. The story is very simple. It's about this journalist by the name of Edward Malone, who's trying to impress this woman of whom he has an affinity, or for whom he has an affinity. And in order to do that, he tries his best to sort of get involved in some or another adventure to sort of prove his, eligibility in claiming this prize. And he ends up being involved in the affairs of Professor Challenger, who suggests there being the presence of a plateau in South America where prehistoric creatures continue to reside to this day. And Malone takes up the offer not only for the sake of his paper, but also to sort of win the heart of this woman, Gladys, and also just to get a sense of adventure. And this party of Challenger, Malone, this one scientist named Professor Summerlee, and the big game hunter, Lord John Roxton, go down to South America to this plateau, are actually trapped on the plateau, and among the various and sundry events and such that take place there, and the various wildlife and everything that they encounter, they have to try and find a means of getting off it in order that they may not perish there. Wonderful book, just as good as the first time I read it, and I did a review of all the film adaptations of The Lost World. It's one of my first videos I did a while back, and I believe that none of them do a justice to this book. In fact, I'll get to that point later. I'll have to talk about these other books before I do that. But anyway. Alright, the second Challenger story is The Poison Belt. Now I've got to be very, very careful as to how I talk about this one, lest I should upset any fragile viewers. But essentially, it's been 3 years since the events described in The Lost World, and the whole party who went down to South America is coming together at Challenger's residence to celebrate their 3rd anniversary of their expedition. And Challenger basically sends them each letters, very curious letters, telling them to bring tubes of oxygen with them to his residence for whatever reason. And as they go down there, they start expressing some very unusual traits which verge on lunacy. And when they do get down there, they learn from Challenger that he has theorized that the world itself has entered into this poisonous belt of ether that essentially would amount to the end of the world. And they observe from inside of his residence the surroundings about it and the gradual dropping of bodies, and just various towns going up in flames and all that because of the effects of this ether. And they are all isolated in this one room in which they live off a supply of oxygen and try their best to live out the end of their days. Or do they? You have to read the book in order to find it out yourself. This was actually very, very interesting. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I read it in one sitting, and was actually very humorous too, I must say. Very uplifting, I must say as well. And a worthy follow-up to The Lost World, in my opinion. I recommend it to everybody, I guess. Now, the third novel, The Land of Mist, is an interesting sort of a tale. Challenger takes the back seat in this one, is not necessarily featured all that much, and it is actually the first and only Challenger story not to be told in the first person. And basically, Malone has been told by his news editor to investigate the, I suppose, I don't know, conduct of spiritualist churches and such. This has a lot to do, this novel has a lot to do with Conan Doyle's own beliefs in spiritualism and how he perceives them and everything like that. And Malone is basically accompanied by Challenger's daughter, Enid, who, let me tell you, never have I felt such a strong affinity for a character in literature, I must say, than Enid Challenger. With her, he basically goes through various experiences of the supernatural air, attending seances and sort of, I guess, I don't know, spiritualist sermons and all of that. and also having several psychic experiences, one of which happens to be him and Lord Roxton with this one clergyman going down to a haunted house, spending the night there, and exorcising a spirit from it. So basically, they were the first Ghostbusters. So $10 Slimer right there. If you want to know what inspired your inspiration, then that's the source. And then through this, basically, they try and convince Challenger that spiritualism is in fact credible, to which he is opposed. And I'm not going to say very much more about this book, but I will say to you, I would recommend it, but be warned that it is a little tedious in parts. There are some talks about religion in here and how they may connect to spiritualism and how they may have other types of spiritualism and all that. And there are also parts in there that may not seem to be important concerning other characters, other not really all that important characters. But I found it to be a wonderful read, really. The two short stories I shall touch upon briefly because they're short, there's not much to talk about. The Disintegration Machine is about Malone goes down to Challenger's place, and basically they go down to investigate this Latvian fella who has invented a machine that basically displaces matter and can both disintegrate it and reassemble it at will. And basically they have to go down there and prove the credibility of it. A very humorous story, I must say. And also it's indicated that this invention, were it got into the wrong hands, could result in disaster. But a very humorous story indeed. A very short one too. I'm talking about a half hour. But I liked it very much. And then the final story in here, When the World Screamed, is also a very interesting one, in which Challenger puts forth the theory that the Earth itself is a living organism. Yes, very much like a sea urchin or echinus, because it's, round on the sides and flat on the top and bottom and such, and therefore, it's a great heaving mass and all that, and we are just animalcules dispersed on it and all that business. And basically, he hires the help of one, I believe his name is Peerless Jones. I believe that's his name, unless I've forgotten it already. Let's see. Oh dear. Oh, I tore the thing. Oh well. Yes, Peerless Jones. He hires the help of him, who is experienced in, artesian boring, to basically go down deep into the earth and basically try and see whether his theory is true. Is it true? Read the story. So, if you have not read any of the Professor Challenger stories, I recommend them all to you. I've only just read The Lost World up until recently, and I was very pleasantly surprised when I did read these. I read these with such pleasure that it has in fact cured me of the poison that has been instilled in me from the gorilla hunters. And now to the point that I'm going to discuss, that I brought up in the review prior to this. I had said that none of the film adaptations came close to doing the book The Lost World justice. I believe that there is one chance that if anybody were to make a film to do it justice, I think that it should be to text, meaning that all the dialogue spoken and all the actions that take place in the book occur in the film, with, of course, slight alterations and inclusions. And also that the main role of Challenger be played by the English actor Brian Blessed, known from Flash Gordon, Zed Cars, various Shakespearean productions, etc. Now, I know he is quite old now. He's 83. He's got about, 5-10 years left on him. I would like for this preferably to be done as soon as humanly possible. He has expressed in the past that he wanted to play Challenger at one time. He was denied it when they were going to film the BBC version of The Lost World, but there were complications because of an aeroplane crash in Brazil, and so they had to settle with Bob Hoskins. And it's one of his favorite books too. So obviously, and just look at the person himself. He is basically Challenger incarnate. So obviously he must play him. He was born for the role. I'm going to make it happen. Myself, I don't know how I'm going to fund it, but I am going to make it so that Challenger is played by Brian Blessed in a to-text adaptation of The Lost World. And I don't know, let's see. I guess we'll have maybe, Robert Pattinson as Malone. Maybe Sam Neill as, Summerlee. Because I've seen many films, not just his most famous work, but other films lately, like Sleeping Dogs and all that, in which he proved to be a very competent and wide-ranged actor. And plus, he's been in the biggest dinosaur film of all time, so obviously he's qualified. And I don't know who you can get to play Roxanne. Leave your opinions down in the comments as to who you think would be a good Lost World cast for a modern, well, not modern, but to-text adaptation of this book. All right, well, that's all I have to say today. And I forgot to mention also that it is Conan Doyle's 161st birthday that I'm filming this, and hopefully it'll be up today. I don't know, but we'll see. And I hope you all have a very good evening or morning or whenever you're seeing this. I have no idea when. But either way, read these when you can, and I'll see you around. Bye.